Um, Whenever we go to a place, whether it's in this case a Dharma center, or we go to someone's house, or someone invites us for dinner, or we get together on a picnic, or we do anything with anyone, I think we need to retrain our mind to think how kind everybody is and how much preparation has been done for all of this to happen. So let me take the example of the Dharma Center. In a Dharma Center, in our case, the place is air-conditioned, well-lit, clean, free of mosquitoes, free of insects, smells pleasant. Cushions and chairs are provided to the best. There's clean toilets. There's a beautiful altar for our eyes to see so that we may be blessed by the presence of holy beings. And also, people came in, people donated all these items, and people set up all these items. And also people came in and prepared these items before you came, and the people who prepared the items also have a family and work, and they had to take time away to prepare. So for all of us who think that we're very busy and we can't contribute or help, everybody else is the same situation. It's just what our priorities are. And at the same time, we should think how everything's been arranged and how it's been established and how the license of the center is valid and how long it took to get the license and how the committees have submitted their names to keep this place going. And also we should think, not pointing to myself, but in general, how kind the teacher is to have studied many, many years and have taken on the disciplines of the monastery and taken on the disciplines of the teacher and have guru devotion and have taken in thousands and thousands and thousands, literally thousands and thousands of hours of teachings from their gurus. The teachers took from their gurus, and perhaps hundreds and hundreds of hours of meditation and also retreats. So the teacher is very, very kind because while the rest of us are making money, having a family, having fun, getting dressed, going to parties, our teachers were actually in India or Nepal or Tibet, ordained, taking on vows that you even at this stage would not be able to take, even one or two, but your teachers have taken vows many, many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, and held on to them. And also your teachers have taken on the initiations and retreats, have taken on oral transmissions, and literally sat thousands and thousands of hours at the feet of his teachers, receiving Dharma teachings, studying, meditating, practicing. So the teacher is extremely kind because why is the teacher kind? For sitting in front of you and giving you Dharma talks? No. That is only part of the picture. The other part is all the preparation that the teacher put in before the teacher actually gave you teachings. The many, many years of preparation. So we have to think about the sacrifice, the time, the energy, and the effort that the teacher, him or herself, put in order to give you Dharma teachings. And therefore, to criticize such a teacher or to have negative thoughts of such a teacher, and if the teacher has put in so much effort, you criticize the 10, 20, 30 years of effort the teacher has put in. Therefore, when you do Dharma practice, it's very, very hard to gain attainments, we believe. Why is it very hard? Because you criticize something that's been very virtuous. If someone's making offerings or prostrations to the Dalai Lama's throne and we criticize, then when we do the same action, we will not get the result. Why? The force of the criticism is negative karma, speech negative karma. So in the future, when we talk, people won't believe us and won't listen to us. So therefore, we have to think the kindness of the teacher, the kindness of the people, the kindness of the committee, the kindness of everybody around that has been involved. Similarly, if we go to someone's house, we have to think, wow, this person actually sent out invitations, rearranged their time, bought the meal, cleaned it, prepared it, cleaned up their house, got themselves dressed, opened their doors to you, and prepared the whole evening for you. So my point is, wherever we go, instead of going in with this thinking, oh, this is good, this is not good, that's wonderful, that's not wonderful, and to have this kind of mind of critical projection, a projection that's critical all the time, makes the whole situation unhappy. In fact, if we can change our viewpoint around, is to think how kind people really are, how generous people really are, how lucky I am to be able to attend a Dharma talk? Would I be able to join the monastery for 10 years, 20 years? Would I be able to study under so many teachers? Would I be able to sit for thousands of hours of Dharma teachings? Would I be able to give up my family, give up my friends, give up my country, give up my freedom, give up my job, give up my pursuit of personal happiness, even giving up the freedom to wear easygoing, clean clothes instead of heavy robes? Who will be able to do? Who in this room will be able to give up your pursuit of money, relationship, friends, your family, shave your hair, go to India, take on the vows, never pursue money again, never pursue relationships again, never pursue things that bring you self-desire content? Who can do that? And not think about money, not think about your house, not think about investments, not think about your old age, not think about yourself. And to join a monastic order such as Gandhin, which I did, of 3,000 monks to follow the rules, to hold the vows. And not only on top of that, you're not left alone just to chant and meditate and pray and study. You're also asked to go abroad to teach. You're also asked to go and raise funds. Who can do that? Who can do all that and do that for the rest of their lives? Well, I've done that for the last 20 years. And I'll be doing that for the rest of my life. So when we have to think of all the sacrifice the teacher has given in order to bring you the teachings. So that when we attend the teachings, we should feel extremely privileged, very, very lucky, and show the utmost respect towards the teacher, not only as a person, but as the activities that the person has done for the last 20, 30 years. And the reason for that is when we have respect for those activities, we gain the merits and the affinity that we have success in our spiritual endeavors. When we criticize a teacher of that caliber, when we criticize a teacher of that much sacrifice and that much effort, you inadvertently bring negative karma about yourself. Inadvertently. And then if you perceive or see that your teacher has one or two faults, and you don't see the good qualities about your teacher all the time, it's very dangerous. I'll tell you why. It is not the Tibetan way of trying to make you think that your teacher is pure and holy and wonderful and is free of mistakes. No. It is a training for us to look at other people's good points. It is a training for our mind to focus on the good qualities of another person and to stop having negative projections of another person or another situation. Why? No one gives us suffering. No one has put suffering in front of us. We have created the suffering. Why have we created the suffering? Because of our view and our wrong perception of what is going on around us. Our wrong perception of a person, our wrong perception of a message, our wrong perception of communication, a wrong perception of what is going on around us, and then we react to that wrong perception. When we react to that wrong perception, more and more wrong perceptions come. For example, if we've spent a lot of time on our shirt, and it's our favorite shirt, and we really have taken care of it, and we've sent it to the cleaners, and we've dried it, and we've done everything we can to maintain it, and it's our favorite color. Another person might come to us and say, oh, you know what? That's nice, but you should wear this color and wear that type of shirt because it'll make you look much brighter. So to that person, they're very open and very sharing with their opinions, not to hurt us, but to actually share. But we might have a wrong projection because maybe when we were growing up, we had a lot of people criticize us about our clothes. We had a lot of people say negative things about our clothes, so we blow off the handle. We shout. We scream. We say, I don't want to be his friend anymore. I don't want to be near them anymore. And we take a very small situation and we blow it out of proportion and make it very big, just for something small. Why? In Malaysia, you call it miscommunication. Well, what I like to call it is misperception. Why? Your reality is that maybe when you were very young, you were criticized about your clothes for a long, long time. You were a fashion emergency. So because you were a fashion emergency, you were criticized your whole life. And so recently you've gotten fashion conscious. So if anybody says anything about your shirt or your clothes, you're highly sensitized. Whereas to another person, it's not such a big issue. So therefore, what people say to us, what people perceive of us, is completely different of what we perceive of the same situation. Completely different. Therefore, how we react to the other person, how we act now, pay attention very carefully. This is the key. How we react to the other person is dependent on how narrow or broad our mind is. If our mind is very narrow due to lack of exposure, due to lack of study, and mostly due to lack of application of the Dharma teachings, we will be very sensitive, we will be very angersome, we will hold a grudge, we will always show a black face, we will always show ourselves not to be wrong. Always. And if we have responsibilities, if we have to do certain work, we run away. And when we run away, we think that we have escaped, but actually we open the doors for another negative situation to come even more. And we don't realize that. Most people run away from difficult situations. They escape, they run away, and they think to themselves, hey, I got away with it. I'm all right. See, I got it. I made it easy. Everything's all right now. But actually not. Actually not. If you examine carefully people who run away from difficult situations or they don't challenge and push themselves, and they can, the situations have become more harder and more difficult, more harder and more difficult, more harder, eventually unable to handle. So temporarily, we escape from a situation so we don't have any sufferings. We escape from a situation so that we don't come across any difficulties. But the very fact that we escape is because we want to get away from difficulties. But in fact, we invite even more difficulties, only in grander and wider and bigger scales. So how do we deal with that? What I always say is, why is confession very strong? Because it is to verbalize what we have done. When we confess what we have done, there's no room to hide. When there's no room to hide, it doesn't fester. When it doesn't fester, it doesn't hide, it doesn't become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So keeping quiet about one's own faults is very damaging. Keeping quiet about another person's faults is patience. When we keep quiet about another person's faults, it's patience. But when we keep quiet about our own faults, it's very detrimental. On a psychological level, it's very detrimental. Psychosomatic diseases, psychosomatic problems arise from holding, hiding, and covering what we have done wrong. Psychosomatic is something that arises from the mind. Some physical ailment, some sickness, some outer difficulties that the source is not really the difficulties. The source is from the inside. Psychosomatic. So therefore, confession, talking, explaining is very, very powerful. When we do that, we heal. Psychosomatic disorders. Psychosomatic. No one has extra perception ears yet. Psychosomatic. Disorders that arise from internal but nothing actually external.
就是一种外在的一种病象，但是它是起源于内心的一个问题，内心的一个缺陷。
Psychosomatic disorders arise from hiding, covering, avoiding, and not facing one's own personal mistakes. So maybe some of us here is not confirmed about karma and Buddhas, and not confirmed about cause and effect, but we can be confirmed about psychosomatic disorders. It is scientific. That is hiding something inside, and it festers and becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and wider and wider. Then after a long, long time, it's very hard for someone to escape from it. Very, very hard. And that comes from escape, running away, avoiding, not facing, and keeping quiet and hoping everybody forgets. Everybody will forget. Definitely, everybody will forget, but you won't. And it will come up again and again. And you may even change your whole set of friends, but you're going to have to change them again and again, or you have very little friends. People who have very little friends, doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they're very narrow. It just means they're very very petty. They look at small things, they don't look at the big things. They create a lot of suffering for themselves and people around them. To understand what I'm talking about psychologically is not enough. We have to apply it. We have to apply it. Some of us have been in Dharma for 2 years. Some of us have been in Dharma 3 years. Some of us have been in Dharma 5 years. You have to open up your chest and say, what's the result? From the time I started Dharma till now, what's the result? Then if we say, oh, my teacher is very bad. Oh, the Dharma students around me is very bad. Oh, I don't have time. Oh, I'm busy. Those are not excuses. Because Dharma practice is not the half hour we sit in front of our altar practicing. Dharma practice is every day we deal with people and how we deal with people. Every single day, how we deal with people is Dharma practice. That's very, very important to know. So, wrong perception. Wrong perception. Wrong perception. And wrong perception is based on wrong experiences. Wrong experiences arise again from wrong perception. Wrong perception again is fed by wrong experience. And it's catch-22. It goes back and forth, becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. Right now, most of us operate on wrong perception, fed by wrong experience. What is a wrong experience? When someone tells us our shirt can be changed to become better, we become very insulted. We become very hurt because previous experience told us that's the way we should react. Previously, we reacted this way, so now we must react this way. And what's the danger? The danger is previously if we acted this way, and now we act this way, the people now are different. The situation now is different. Therefore, since the people and situation now is different, and we act the same way we acted before, we can lose many opportunities. Many opportunities. We can lose a lot of opportunities. Friends, husband, wives, friends, relatives. We can lose all. Why? How we act before to a previous situation cannot be applied now. So someone who has a lot of anger, have a lot of anger. We say in Tibetan, someone who has a lot of anger, they have a lot of anger because in the past, people have acted or said to them or did things in such a way to them that it helped them to create this anger. But now that they have this anger, they're not with their parents anymore. They're not with their relatives. They're not with their ex-wife. They're not with their ex-husband. They're not in that situation anymore. But that situation is still living on in them now. Why? How they acted before, they're acting now to new people. So if we were in a store and we own the shop and we have a rotten customer, a very nasty customer, and they're fighting and we fight back, they fight us and we fight back, and then they go away, we're very angry. If another customer comes and we react the same way, the customer will say, but I didn't do anything. I'm innocent. But you see, because we're angry, we look at the new person, they'll probably treat me badly, they'll put me down, they'll say negative things to me again. And then maybe the next customer would have come and bought something, then we lose the chance. Similarly, if we have a lot of anger, as an example, from previous experience, if we have a lot of anger, and we still take the previous experience and apply it to current experiences, that's how we lose our chance in life. That's how we always lose our chance. And then, do you always hear people saying, some people say, some people don't say, or some people feel sorry for themselves and they think that way. Well, when I was little, my mother used to scold me like that, what? When I was in school, they used to treat me like that, what? And then when my father talked to me like that, what? My brother said like this to me, what? And you hear that, and they use that as an excuse to continue what they're doing now. Even people who had a very easy life, they had everything given to them on a silver platter. Everything has been presented to them on a silver platter. That is a result of very negative karma. Very negative. I've come to the conclusion. People who have parents that take care of them, give them money, nurture them, and not let them go through pain, not let them go through learning, not let them experience, not let them grow bigger, those kids are the result of very extreme negative karma from previous lives. Why is that? Because they will take the wealth, they will take the leisure, they will take the opportunity and have a good time, waste it away frivolously, don't care about tomorrow, don't care about other people, not conscientious, don't push themselves, don't make an effort, and they don't experience their full potential. If they have the money for the rest of their lives, that's very good. But that money will bring them down to a lower and lower and lower and lower and lower level. I know that because I've met many live examples of that in the past. Many past. They can't take responsibility. They're socially retarded. They're not able to perceive reality correctly. What's perceived reality? To see the situation. They're not able to put effort. They're not able to push themselves. They're not able to achieve anything on their own. Everything must be given to them. And if anything's taken away, blackface, depression, anxiety, and a general feeling of poor me and I can't do it. And the symptom of that is they usually keep quiet. Why is that? You observe. Because they're waiting for you to come up with a solution. Why is that? Because they've taken the experiences from previous years that they've done things and they expected someone to give them a solution. So when they get older, the same thing happens. So consequently, these people, when they're with their parents and their parents give them solutions, it's all cute and nice. Little Johnny is fine. Little Diana's fine. But when little Johnny and little Diana grows up and they come across a new situation and people cannot come up with solutions for them, will not entertain their spoiled actions, will not help them, or will get tired of them, little Johnny and Diane gets depressed. Why? Because previously when they acted like that, they got this type of response. But now when they act like that, they get a different response. So the previous response and the new response in their psyche is not matching. Then depression sets in. Why does depression set in, or unhappiness, or a feeling of poor me, I can't do anything? Because they're not used to the new reaction. But what little Johnny and Diana doesn't realize is how you reacted 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and how you react now will not apply anymore. That is wrong experience. Applied to wrong experience, which is feeding wrong perception. And then the wrong perception, so when they act like this now, they're not with their parents anymore. They're with adults, and they're supposed to be an adult. They want all the privileges of an adult, which is respect, love, care, independence. They want all the privileges and the trappings of an adult, but not the responsibility. So what happens is, since they don't want the responsibility of an adult, they want the trappings of it, there's another double conflict. So these people live in double conflicts all the time. And what is that conflict? Is that people don't react back to them the way they're used to. So they react back. They don't know how to react. They don't know how to act anymore. So they show a black face. They pout. Poor me. They cry. They do nothing. They wait for you to give them a solution. Because that's what they've been doing for years and years and years. And so when they do that now, it creates a wrong perception to others. Like, why are they not doing this for me? I'm a nice person. I acted like this before, and my mother and father was very nice to me. But why? I'm the same person. Why am I not getting the same reaction back? And then at the same time, another type of wrong perception is then people look at us because people don't know that we had such an easy life. We had such a good life. That our mothers and fathers took wonderful care of us. That we were little princesses and princes when we were growing up. So then people have wrong perception of us. Why? They think, oh, what a selfish individual. What a self-centered individual. What a lazy individual. What an unmotivated person. What a loser. Oh, I don't want to be around them. I don't want to be near them. I don't want to be with them. I don't want to associate with them. And then the people go away from them more and more. So wrong perception from outside to them. Wrong perception from them to the outside. And then you know what happens? It gets bigger. Why? Then anger sets in. What kind of anger? Anger of not getting what we want and not knowing why. And what's even worse is when we know why we're not getting what we want and we're so habituated in not doing something about it. And therefore, what comes about is us running away from a different situation. Every time a difficult situation comes about, we run away. A difficult person, a difficult job, a difficult timeline, a difficult situation, we run away. We can't take it. Why? Now we are trapped. Who trapped us? Ourselves. If you want to look at a psychological profile, you can say our parents or our childhood experiences trapped us. Yeah. I mean, that only brings you to one level. Then what happens in psychology is you have to blame someone. You have to make someone the enemy. You have to push the responsibility on someone else. So Western psychology is good to only a certain level. Why? You push the psychology to someone else. You push the responsibility. Oh, it was my mother. It was my father. It was my auntie. It was my schoolmates. It was my brothers and sisters. I'm competitive and I cheat and I lie to win because my brothers and sisters always did well and I couldn't. So I got into this mode of lying and cheating to compete with them. And then in psychology, we start crying, we break down, we go through past hypnosis therapy, and we find out that in our previous life we were a cow. Then we fast forward, we find out, no, we don't want to go that far, that this life we were a human being. And then we fast forward past that, we were a cow for 10 lifetimes. And then one of our lifetimes we were a cow that couldn't have any calves. So there's some psychological trauma now. The past life, really, we were all cows, we were some yaks, we were some weirdos, we were killers, and we're all types of people. So what happens, we say, okay, let's not go that far, let's go a little forward. Let's go 10 years, not 100 years back. So 10 years back, 20 years back, we go back with psychotherapy, with hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is therapy that they treat you by going under hypnosis to remember what you experienced. And we say, oh, you know what? Every time I failed, my mother was very fierce on me. Very, very fierce. So I'm afraid to fail. And I love my mother because she wasn't fierce on me because she hated me, because she had a difficult life and she wanted me to have a good life. So then we pin the blame on our mother. We don't hate her because we know she's not evil. But psychology says, oh, I pin the blame on my mother. How many serial killers? I watched Discovery serial killer profiling. How many serial killers, when they profile them or they go through hypnotherapy, they go back and they say, when I was a kid, I was abused by my uncle. I was abused by my neighbor. And they start crying and crying. So they pin the blame on someone that touched them. It's a very famous thing in America. I was touched. So when you say I was touched, it is all right to sexually abuse other people. It's kind of a catchword now. If you're mean and difficult to other people, it's kind of saying that you had a lot of pressure on you when you were growing up. So that's okay. I'm not saying that's not the truth. I'm saying that's the truth on the lowest level. It's not going to a higher level. What's the higher level? In Buddhist psychology, we want to say, yes, it was my mother who pushed me to be so competitive, and therefore today I'm extremely competitive and I have to be the top of everything and I will sacrifice everything to be on top. Or in Western psychology, or in Buddhist psychology, we can say, well, I'm lazy today and I am unmotivated and I don't achieve anything. And then when we hypnotherapy back 10, 20 years, we find out that our mother has been breastfeeding us till we were 6. And then we were sucking on pacifiers till we were 10. And every time we fell down, mommy gave us a lollipop, an ice cream, and took us out to the Ferris wheel to make everything all right. It was a big deal. Mama kept doing that. Maybe we were only child. And maybe even accidental. So what happens is this. My point is, when we psychotherapy back, we check out, oh my God, that's how this person has experienced life. That any small things, someone rescued them. Any small someone rescued, someone helped, someone delivered them. So when they grow up, how do they live? They live on wrong experience and they live on wrong perception. Wrong experience is that they've been rescued. Wrong perception is they still want people to take care of them. And they live this way. And when they live this way, they make people suffer. So some people, maybe they had mothers that were good mothers, but very angersome, very temperamental. If you made mother angry, mother wouldn't talk to you. Mother won't talk to you for 1 month, 1 day, 1 week. My mother did that to me. When my mother got very angry with me, she would ignore me for 2-3 weeks. Total silence. Total silence. No communication. It would be cold silence, and it would be very scary for me. Very, very scary to live in a house with someone with so much anger and so much silence. I blamed her for a few years when I was very young. But when I got older and I studied Buddhism, I realized it's not really her fault. I went deeper. So therefore, you have people who live with mothers and fathers who are very angersome and ignore them. So they have this experience. Why? They respect their mother. Their mother is their God. Their mother is their idol. Their mother is their centerpiece, and it influences their mind very strong. So therefore, what happens is they grow up doing the same thing to others. If someone makes a small mistake with them, they ignore you. They show you a black face. They don't talk to you. Or they have very big egos, they hold on. And they make everybody go away. So if you give them $10, they're very happy. But if you take away 10 cents, they forget about the $9.90 you gave them, and they think about the 10 cents you took away. So you're like, huh? You still got $9.90. But they're very angry about the 10 cents. And they hold on to the 10 cents. They took the 10 cents away from me. 10 cents, 10 cents, 10 cents. And they wear the shirt. They took 10 cents. And they don't talk to you. You took 10 cents away from me. Then they walk this way. You took 10 cents away from me. Pretty soon they call you 10 cents. And they don't think about the $9.90 you already gave them. You give them $9.90 and you take away 10 cents and they throw a BF. And then they ignore you. They don't talk to you. They think you're bad. And they say, I want a divorce. I want to leave you. I'm going. I'm running away. I'm not happy. And they do that for weeks and months and months. Why? When they were young, they saw their mothers or fathers doing that to them. That happened to me. You see, let me tell you a little secret. I wasn't born a Buddha. Yes, I know, I'm sorry. Some of you call me the living Buddha. What's that in Chinese? Microphone.
活佛，活佛，
Hobo.
活
I'm not a hobo. He called me a hobo.
活
What's your-
佛，
Ho fo. Oh, I like that. Ho fo. Sounds like you're very fat. Oh, ho fei. Oh, no. Okay, never mind. Ho fei, ho fo. Okay, ho fei, ho fo. Yeah. Ho fei, ho fo. I like that. Fei is fat, right? I don't know what dialect, but I heard that somewhere. It's the fei ya. Oh, I hate that word. I don't like F words. Fat and fei, I don't like. It's a very nasty word. Fei and fat. Ooh. Anyways, when I went to China, they used to say, "Ho fei ah." And I said, you ho stupid ah. But they meant it as a compliment because I look good fat in China. You don't look at my Chinese pictures, don't reproduce them, don't put them on the altar, and don't buy them at auctions. Never. They're horrible. If you buy fat pictures of me at auctions, it's bad karma. You're going to go to the 3 lower realms and never come out. And if you display it and make offerings and show people, there's no enlightenment for you. None. That's right. You know, I gave that fat picture away because I didn't think anybody would buy it. I'll get rid of it because I thought, all these people, they'll find a way to store it because I don't want to store it. Oh my God, it's sold. I was like, you got to be kidding. Then I asked, who's the sicko, the disturbed person who bought the Ho Fei picture? Yeah, I was thinking, who's so sick? I thought it must be someone new, some auntie, 90 years old from China or from Seremban, or some auntie from some small kampong like Trengganu or something. I really thought that. I didn't know it was some big elite hotelier. I won't tell you who. And then the next thing when I heard that it was a hotelier bought it, I thought to myself, oh dear, when I walk into the lobby, I hope I don't see myself. That's so scary. In India, they put their gurus' pictures in the hotel lobbies. Yeah, I was thinking, it's very... Imagine I walk into one of these high-class hotels in Chowkit, and I see myself. Oh dear. I know everybody's thinking there's no high-class hotels in Chowkit. Oh. So, for people out there on the planet, Chowkit is red light district in Malaysia. It's red light district because there's a lot of red lights there. We won't say anymore because we don't want to defame Malaysia. This is Visit Malaysia year, you know. Okay, so actually maybe that's why they'll come. Okay, so when we look back and every time we make a little mistake, every time we lose, every time we don't succeed, our little daddies and our little mommies take care of us, and they do that enough times, we grow up to be losers. And whether we stay a loser or not is dependent on our knowledge and our application. Why? It took you this much effort to be a loser, so that means you have effort. No one can sit there and wait for the whole planet for years and years to do something for their life. Okay, there's a few people. Okay, I'll take it back. Okay, no one can sit there their whole life and wait for the planet to take care of them. That's effort. You know why that's effort? You see everybody moving up. You see everybody succeeding. You see everybody getting better. You see people moving to a next level. You see people with bigger cars. You see people with nicer bodies, nicer houses, beautiful wives, beautiful husbands. And they have nice pets. And everything, they're moving up. So to sit in the middle of everybody moving up in all this materialism and not have anything and not push yourself to anything, that's a lot of effort. It is a lot of effort. People think it's effortless. It's not. It's a lot of effort to remain a loser. My point? For losers, and that's how I overcame myself. For losers, you don't think you don't have effort. You do have effort. It's just that you don't recognize where you've been dispersing your effort. So for losers to stay around, do nothing, not finish their work, not dot their I's and cross their T's, wait for people to rescue them, and just sit there, poor me look, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. If we go on the streets and we see homeless people, there are a few that's sincere, but there are some that are not. It takes a lot of effort to go out there because pride, ego, face, people looking at you, spitting on you, looking down on you. For a few dollars here and there, it's a lot of effort to stay there to maintain that facade. So people who are losers, it takes a lot of effort to remain a loser. So my point, to insult losers? No. My point is to recognize the fact how our mind plays tricks on us. We have effort. We have effort. So if we recognize we have effort, we go, oh yeah. We turn that around and we apply it to something else. We can be an excellent winner just as we are an excellent loser because we have an effort. But the secret is not keeping quiet about the wrongs we have done. And in psychology, isn't that exactly what they teach you? In psychology, when you go for therapy, don't they make you open up and talk about what you did wrong? And once you face yourself, everybody else becomes easier. Because once you face yourself and come to terms with yourself, everybody else is much easier. I'll tell you why. You live with yourself 24 hours a day. You don't live with others 24 hours. So to face them sometimes it's easy. You can avoid them, turn them off, throw their picture out, not go to parties where they are. It's easy. But yourself, you can't turn yourself off. You can't avoid yourself. You can't get away from yourself. You can't run away from yourself. Therefore, to face yourself and to confess your wrong, first to yourself and to acknowledge, and then confess to someone that can make a difference in your life. A psychologist, a teacher, your parents, a close friend, a mentor, is the next step to healing. What kind of healing? To get out of your habit. To keep quiet about, and if you make mistakes, you keep quiet and hope people don't notice. Yeah, there are people out there who will notice. They won't notice. But you notice because you're with yourself. So if you keep quiet about your own mistakes, it will get bigger. It will get stronger. Don't talk about karma. Don't talk about karma. Just talk about psychology. It will get bigger. Similarly, if you grew up with a lot of anger like I did, I had a lot of anger in my life when I was a child. My mother, with respect to her, please do not think I am putting her down. I am not. Was filled with anger. She went through World War II. She suffered poverty. She suffered upheaval of her home twice. She had to be an immigrant twice. She was uneducated. She had to struggle and work for factories her whole life. She worked very hard. She was a very, very intelligent lady and quite kind, but she suffered quite a lot. She's passed away last year. So my point is, she had a lot of anger, and I knew why. I found out later that she had a lot of anger is because she had a lot of rejection when she was a child. She had a lot of pain. She would walk out of her house and there would be soldiers' corpses all over the roads. And she would be made to go out to find food for the family. They didn't beat her, and it was a very scary experience. She had to become very hard and very cold to go through walking. I mean, imagine a young girl, pretty, innocent, pure, going through all these corpses and dead people and stealing bread, stealing food, becoming hard. And then people putting her down, soldiers catching her, people spitting on her. She was also in the concentration camp when she was very young in Germany. What the Jewish people experienced, she experienced too in the concentration camp. I found that out all later. So my point is, that's what made her very angry and hard. So I took on some of her characteristics, and I'll tell you why. Because she was my example. I actually respected her very much. I used to make things in school for her and give it to her all the time because I like her a lot. She wasn't my real mother, my adopted mother. And so what happened was when she was angry at someone, At that moment when she became angry, she didn't see anything else. Nothing else. And she would ignore the person. My mother would avoid and ignore the person for weeks and months. I heard before she died, she was ignoring some of our relatives for 1 year. She went to their wedding. She was upset about some small thing. She threw a huge BF. And she left the wedding. Upsetted the whole relatives, the crowd, hundreds of people. And she just went stomping home because she wanted you to go and beg her. Come back. Don't go. Nobody would do that. Everybody got tired of it. And she ignored that side of the family, which was her own younger sister and her nieces, for 1 year. And the year after that, she passed away. I heard that from my relatives, my step-relatives in America. My point is, she lived like that for many, many, many years. And I learned that. You know what I learned? When I'm angry with someone, ignore them. Don't talk to them. Don't look at them. Don't talk to them. And wait for them to come to me first. I learned that from my mother. And I did that in America for many years. Not on an extreme level, not on an evil level. Just certain people that really got on my nerves, and there was a few. You see, wherever I go, I attract all kinds of weirdos and freaks and people. All types, wherever I go. The weirdos, the freaks, the leftovers, the losers, all these weirdos. I never get nice people or normal people. I don't know what normal means. I usually get the freaks. Always, I'm not kidding. All the deranged, all the ones that didn't fit anywhere else. It's like a shelter. And I attracted that my whole life, wherever I went. It's not a joke. You see some of the motley crew of friends I've had in America. Well, some have visited me. So, you've seen them. I'm not putting them down. They're people, and they're beautiful too. What I'm saying is you attract what you send out. So, I can point at myself. But I did that for years. I ignored people. I avoided people. Some people I ignored for 6 months and a year. And then later when I thought about it, when I attended Dharma class with Geshe Tsuram Gelton in Los Angeles, because I lived at the center, I realized I was doing exactly what my mother was doing to me and other people. And so I wasn't healed. You know why I wasn't healed? Because I was blaming her. Then I would tell people it's her fault. That's what she trained me. That's what she taught me. That's what she said. That's what she did. That's all I knew. And then when I learned Dharma more, I went on to the next level. You see, if you do Western psychotherapy, you rest right there. It's your mother's fault. She treated you like that, and you stop. You don't go the next level. In Buddhism, you go the next level. You say like this: there are so many mothers and fathers on this planet. Why did I take rebirth with that parent? Why? So, in that Buddhist theory, you go back to cause and effect, which is you, myself, yourself, created the karma to be born in this kind of environment to experience this type of experience. So therefore, I go back to saying that if you're born with a lot of wealth, you're born with an easy life and golden things put on the platter for you and everything is spoon-fed to you and everything's very easy. If you end up a loser, you can see that born into wealth was very bad karma, is a result of bad karma. Bad karma do not have wrong perception. Bad karma is not living on the streets or not having anything or coming across with no parents or orphans or not having money when you're growing up. Because we read a lot of success stories where people were literally on the streets begging. And they had no parents, or they were refugees of a war, or they were maimed, or they didn't have arms or legs. We read a lot of cases like that. We also read a lot of cases of very successful people who come from very successful families and they have a heritage of success in their families. We read that. And then we read about people who come from very successful families. The kids are losers, druggies, losers, lazy, waste their life, get fat, dumb, happy. And they just use their parents. They leech their parents. And then we hear about people who were born on the streets, and they were born of parents who were poor and impoverished. And they also grow up like that, and they live their lives impoverished. Yes, so what am I trying to say to you? Karma is not what you were born into, rich or poor, good or bad. It's the result that wealth or that poverty plays in your life. In some people's life, the poverty and the difficulties they went through as a child made them very strong as an adult and powerful as an adult and become very great examples of human beings when they grow up because of the pain they experienced when they were a child. Some people grow up to continue the pain they have experienced to create pain for others. So some people, that negative experience of living on the street is positive karma. They prayed for it. They pray for a situation where they can be born in a difficult situation where it will train their mind up and accelerate their spiritual progress. Accelerate their spiritual progress.
令他们的修行的这个进度有所增长。
Thank you. Accelerate their spiritual practice. So for some people to be born on the streets in difficult situations, they prayed for it. And they were born into it on purpose. And in fact, some of them were born into very difficult situations so that when they grow up and other people hear about it, it will inspire millions of people. Millions. So for them to be born in such an ugly, nasty, disgusting situation, for us, we're like you, but for them, they grow up to be superhumans. Superhumans. His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, the greatest scholar and monk of this planet at this time, was born to simple farmers. The father never showed much respect to him, didn't even know what a high lama or anything is, although he's Tibetan, quite, kampong. But look at His Holiness. Then you have sons and daughters that are born of aristocratic families in Tibet. Once they lost their country, their privilege, their status, their name, they come out there, they can't even farm their land. I've seen some of them. They call themselves nobility now as refugees, but nobody respects them because they don't do anything with themselves. So, some people are born into tremendous wealth. Their mothers and fathers are living zambalas. And they give their children everything because their parents love them so much. But that is the result. If they grow up to continue the legacy of their parents' success and kindness and become successful people, you can consider that good karma. But if they grow up to be losers, scared of the world, very naive, unable to stand on their own, it's not their parents' fault. It is the fault of the child to be born in such a situation where it doesn't ever challenge them. And there are some people born into very wealthy situations, and they turn around and they use that wealth to benefit others. They use their name, they use their status, they use their position to benefit others. Again and again and again and again. So my point is, I want you to have a new perception today. And there's a reason for that. If you have a new perception today, your depression, your feeling of anxiety, your anger, your mode, M-O-D-E,
你生活的模式，
your mode of reacting and acting with other people will change. And Zongsa Khyentse Rinpoche embodied that in his video. He totally changes your whole mode of perception. He totally changes your whole ideal of how things should be. He totally transforms and blows your mind away of what you think right and wrong, holy and unholy are supposed to be. And he is very kind because he subjects himself to scrutiny, criticism, negative talk, back talk, people putting him down, which I've heard many times before in our community, in order to blow your mind away and to replace it with a new thought, a pure thought. Words of my perfect teacher for this video that you saw is very apt, is very appropriate. Why? Words of my perfect teacher. Perfect doesn't mean your teacher is perfect. Perfect means that you create perfection with your teacher. Perfect means you create perfection with your teacher because your teacher will appear to you in many guises and many ways. Some people meet their teacher. They're very humble and they gain faith and it changes their lives. Some people meet their teacher, they're very rude, they're very arrogant, and they talk very bad to them. But from the teacher's side, the teacher doesn't change. The teacher doesn't change at all. Some people have negative thoughts about their teacher. Some people even think this person teaching me Dharma is not my teacher. They're not my teacher, not good enough. They're not good people. I know them. Then you have judged a person on 10 cents and not $9.90. So therefore, words of my perfect teacher, words can be spoken and unspoken. Remember the last class we had where it was said that, what was it? How many percent of the message is conveyed by body language, not words? How many? Correct. According to scientific studies, messages conveyed to another human being is 70% body, visual. Only 30% is by speech. Only 30%. Scientific studies. So therefore, words of my perfect teacher can be verbal or and or non-verbal. Non-verbal. So if you expect your teacher to walk in wearing beautiful robes, flowing, all holy, shaved, all gentle, sweet, and kind, and with their hands folded, carrying their mala and chanting Om Mani Padme Hum all day long, and going Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. And whatever you do, they never get angry, they never challenge you, and they tell you you're wonderful. And then your teacher walks in off the train, in words of my perfect teacher, in lay clothes, says hello and goodbye, and disappears for 3 hours and makes you wait at some train station for this teacher, and you get pissed off, and you say, that's not how a teacher's supposed to act. Why does the teacher act like that? Why does the teacher talk about sex? Why does the teacher talk about fun? Why does the teacher wear clothes like that? Why does he have hair? Why does he make us wait? Why doesn't he keep his appointment? The teacher is giving you a perfect teaching. Look how your mind says it must be like that, and that. When your mind says it must be like that, and that, your mind is saying that about everyone and everything around you. And then you know what happens? Anger arises. When you get angry, you listen to your own words and how you tell people, you should be like that, what? You should be like that, what? You shouldn't act like that, what? You should act like this, what? Don't we talk like that to other people when we're angry? That is your anger showing you who you really are. So when the teacher, Songsa Kensei Rinpoche, gets off the train, in lay clothes, with a nice bag, going for a ball game, a football game, why would a highly enlightened teacher with so many incarnations, with such a high name, be going to a ball game and watching hooligans? Why? You tell anybody in Malaysia, they say, oh, no, bad teacher, no, bad. Why? Their perception of how a teacher should be is all nicey, holy, cannot talk this, cannot say that. In fact, we make a lot of rules for our teachers. We make a lot of rules for the high lamas. We make a lot of rules for the Rinpoches. Rinpoche, you cannot talk like this. You cannot look like this. You cannot act like this. You cannot dress like this. Why? I read it in a book. So you get people on the forums. And on the forums, they talk about Rinpoches, how they should be, how they should act. And if they don't act and be the way they like, they're bad Rinpoches. They're bad Rinpoches. You're saying, well, you asked for it since you dress like that and look like that, act like that. No, you asked for it. That's why I dress like that and look like that for you. You asked for it. Why did you ask for it? Because you have all these concepts. You have all these pre-concepts in your mind. How a teacher should be. And Songsa Kensei, in his words to his students as a perfect teacher, gives you a message. How do you feel when you wait 3 hours? How do you feel when he gets off the train in lay clothes? How do you feel when he talks about sex? When they ask him, are you ever going to get married? And what you should expect is, no, I'm a monk. He says, when I find the right person. And you're like, huh? How can monks say that? When I find the right person. That's what he said, what? Rinpoche, are you ever going to get married, have a relationship? Yeah, when I find the right person. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to remember that answer. And if you think about it, do you think anybody can equal Rinpoche? Do you think he'll ever find the right person? So he's giving you a message. No. And the other message is he blows your concept away. Imagine a Rinpoche telling you, you ask a Rinpoche, are you going to get married? And he answers you, you expect him. No, I'm not going to get married because I'm a Rinpoche, I'm a monk, and I'm pure, and I've overcome my desire. That's what you expect. So when he says that, donations, ang paos, respect, prostration, I love you. And then if the Rinpoche says to you, if I find the right person, you go, huh? That's what he said. You guys thought Tsem Rinpoche was radical. obnoxious, loud, not following tradition. There's someone bigger than me. There's someone, inverted commas, worse than me. I don't go to ball games and scream at the hooligans. I don't make people wait 3 hours, just one. He stays up the whole night. He stays up the whole night and gets up when he wants. He takes them on a pilgrimage all over Bhutan, and when he reaches his destination without telling them anything, he says, see you later, I'm going to retreat, you guys can go home now. When he went to Taktsang, Tiger's Cave, he just told everybody, I'm going to retreat now. I'm going to go into a retreat in Guru Rinpoche's cave. And see you guys later. Now, I was thinking to myself, they all were like, what? Like, what? I'm like, how do we get back? You know, what do we do? And he's like, that's kind of your problem now. And imagine if I did that. I took you guys to Nepal and I say, see you later. I'm going to hang out at the monastery here and do a retreat. I know what happened when I come back here. My house has been burned. My car has been trashed. My visa has been canceled. I've been reported to immigration. And the forums will have a field day. Guess what Rinpoche did now along with having hair? Just think about it. Imagine if I dare do that here in Malaysia. Even my own Tibetan people criticize me. Oh, a Rinpoche cannot talk like that. Oh, kiss my grits. You're not a Rinpoche. How do you know what a Rinpoche can talk like? You're not a Buddha. You don't even pray. You're a lazy bum. You don't do your practice. You don't do your sadhana. You don't do your mantra. You don't hold your vows. Shini Tensue Meba, no devotion to your guru, and then you can criticize a Rinpoche. Is a Rinpoche above criticism? No, a Rinpoche is not above criticism. But are you in a position to criticize? Do you have Dharma knowledge? Do you do any practice? Are you a good person? Is your life perfect? Are you perfect? The minute Rinpoche walks in, hey, why does he have hair? Nice hair, but why? Why? They always talk like that. So what am I trying to say is, in this video of His Eminence, Songsa Khyentse Rinpoche, he totally blows away your perceptions and what he does. There are times he needs to be formal. He is formal. You think some people on the forums ask, hey, how come when Rinpoche goes back to the monastery, he wears robes? When he comes to Malaysia, he's in lay clothes. Isn't that kind of sneaky? And I'm like, when in Rome, dress like the Romans. It's not sneaky. I know who I am inside. I'm not hiding. All my pictures of me and my modeling, all my modeling pictures has been taken to Gandhi to show my teachers. They laughed out loud. They didn't even say anything. Yeah, I promise you, some of my students took my modeling pictures that I was, fabulous. And they showed all my gurus. My gurus are 75, 80 years old. They laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed out loud. Right, Chia? Khyentse Rinpoche, all that. They looked at my modeling pictures and laughed. Why did they laugh? They thought I looked ridiculous. To them, I look ridiculous. Some more, they say, he lost so much weight. And I'm like, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to lose weight, Rinpoche. Some of them even comment, yeah, poor Rinpoche, he lost so much weight. They send a message, eat more. And I'm like, and I'm sitting here on diet pills, trying to lose weight. They really said that. Some more of my high Rinpoches, my gurus in Ganden, actually said, Rinpoche got so skinny. Poor thing. And over here, they're like, God, you look great. You look so skinny. And so when I came back from Japan, everybody was screaming, you look great. I was walking down Pokipadan, people were going, and I was going, back. That's what they need. Who cares? That's what they like. Give it to them. So when I go there, they say, poor thing, you're so skinny. I come here, they say, wonderful, you're so skinny. Perception. So when I come to Malaysia, at this time, it's not very convenient for me to run around in robes and drive cars and go shopping, do this. I've got to do some work. I need to meet up with some people. I need to do some work where this appearance is more appropriate. When I go to Ganden, I'm not ashamed that I'm in lay clothes, but it's not appropriate there. I am what I am. I'll dress as I am at the appropriate place. Like Zonsa Khyentse, when he went back to Bhutan to give initiations to thousands of people, he didn't walk in off the train and wear his lay clothes. He wore the clothes they wanted because it makes them happy. It makes them happy. At least part of the time I'm wearing monk robes and part of the time I'm moonlighting. The rest of you guys are not moonlighting at all. You're always in that clothes. You don't even wear monk clothes, so that's not bad. Well, for me, at least 50-50. And then people, they'll criticize. Why in monastery he wear that kind of clothes and he come here, he wear like that? It must be he's sneaky, his teachers don't know. Look, stupid. My teachers in Ganden have clairvoyance. They have astral bodies. They have the third eye. They can see what I'm doing in their dreams. One of my gurus, when I first listened to this, listen very carefully. When I first got permission from one of my other teachers to wear lay clothes in this region, when I got permission, one of my other gurus was in North India. My other guru is in South. One of my gurus in North India called me. His name is Drigung Gyamgon Rinpoche. He's a great high lama of the Drigung Kagyupa sect, and he is a married lama with his consort, Her Excellency Ganjin Dromala. Rinpoche doesn't speak English, and he doesn't like to talk on the phone because he's slightly hard of hearing. So he had his consort call me. Ganjin Droma called me and said, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay." Because I lost weight, I was very okay. And I said, why? And she said to me, "Oh, last night, Rinpoche Kiran Nilam Tambaris." I said, "Nilam Karat, dreamt of you." I said, what did it dream of me? You were in lay clothes, you look very good, you were walking down the street, you were wearing pants, and strange dream, huh? And I was like, I swear, they called me to ask if I was all right because Rinpoche dreamed that I was in lay clothes. And his wife called me. I didn't tell anybody. Even people here didn't know. Not yet. I was in Singapore. And so I said to her, "I'm all right. And I'm in lay clothes because I'm in Singapore now. And I have some visa problems. So no choice. And I'm going to be like this for a while. Tell Rinpoche I'm fine." She goes, "Oh, okay, because, Rinpoche dreamt of you last night." And I was like, I'm not kidding. So these people who say, "Hey, how come when he goes back to Ganden, he's in lay clothes? I'm sorry, in monk's clothes, and he comes back here, he's in lay clothes. Isn't that sneaky? What is he? Half monk, half what? Half fox?" Then you put down the high lamas of Ganden. The bottom of the barrel baboons and monkeys like me, you can put down. But those high lamas who are in their 70s, 80s, don't put down. They have clairvoyance. They can see. And if I'm doing anything nasty and ugly and wrong here, I will get a letter. Because 5-6 years back when I didn't want to teach Dharma anymore, I got a long tape cassette from Khensa Rinpoche telling me I should teach Dharma. Why? Not to be lazy. I'm so selfish. I was listening. I was in Kelanjai, I stayed in an apartment. I got a tape from Khensa Rinpoche who was criticizing me. "You're not teaching Dharma. You must teach Dharma. You have your vows. What did I send you to Malaysia to do? And you're hanging out, not teaching," I heard. "You don't want to open a center. Why don't you want to open a center?" Because I told them I don't open a center because there's a lot of responsibilities and a lot of criticism. A lot of people put you down, and then people watch you. People always say things about you, and then jealousy. I don't want to get involved. And people politics, human resource politics, committees. I said, I don't want to. You can ask my old students here, like Irene, all that they know. For years, they say, "Got to open a Dharma center." I said, no. I don't want to. I don't want to. I even told Paul, when I opened this Dharma center, once I open, I'm a different person already. I lose all freedom. I don't want to open a Dharma center. I'm not into sitting on a throne, being a lama, opening a Dharma center, getting ang paos. I'm not into that. You see, I can survive as a layperson if I want to give back my vows. I can survive as a layperson very well. I can survive as a monk. I don't need Dharma. I don't need to sell Dharma in order to make myself rich. I have other capabilities. Many. No, not many. A few capabilities. Many opportunities, that's what I mean. So when I'm in Ganden, why am I in robes? And here, why am I in lay clothes? You leave that to me. I've got my reasons. I've got my permission. And if you don't understand it, too bad. So when my teacher gave me, you will in time, my teacher gave me a tape scolding me. "You don't want to open a Dharma center, right, Cha?" Cha was there when we were listening to it. I was crying. I was crying because I was very hurt because I worked so hard before and it's not enough, and the monastery wants me to do more, and Khensa Rinpoche wants me to do more. I want to go back to India. I want to stay in the monastery, but I'm not allowed to. So I got the tape. Cha was there. I was crying. I was listening to it. I was very hurt. I wasn't angry because my teacher was telling me, "Why don't you want to teach? Why you don't want to stay in Malaysia? In Malaysia, what do you think you're supposed to be doing there? Having a good time? You're supposed to teach. I sent you there to teach. That's what we talked about. You're a Rinpoche. A Rinpoche job is Semjeki Pensum Chekwaris. The Rinpoche's job, the reason they took rebirth is to benefit others. Are you benefiting others? How are you going to benefit others if you don't have a temple, if you don't have a center, if you don't have a place where people can gather? How does it look to people? Oh, I got a huge lecture from him, and I got the tape. Cha was sitting there all in Tibetan. I was in tears. After that, no more tapes. Seriously, after I opened this, no tape. From my abbot, from Ganden Chirimchi, from my gurus, no tapes. Nothing. Once in a while, I get phone calls for them. Last year, Lama Sopa his assistant Roger emailed me, and I called him in Singapore. We talked for 20 minutes on the phone. Henry was sitting right there when I got the call. When I called, I talked to Lama Sopa for about 20 minutes last year. He's one of my gurus because I used to do pujas with him years ago when he wasn't so busy. And he asked me what you're doing, what's happening, what's going on here. You see, I have 14 gurus to report to. Unlike you guys, you have one nasty guru to report to. One. I have 14. So every story I tell them, I got to tell each one because they psychically connect and say if I'm lying or not. I can fool 1 or 2, but I can't fool 14. I'm not kidding. So last year I was talking to His Eminence Sopa Rinpoche on the phone and telling him what I'm doing, what's going on, my center, the size, how many people, what teachings I gave. I had to give him details. I was honored to give him details. I was on the phone scared to death. I couldn't talk. I couldn't find the words. I was panting because I'm very scared to talk to my gurus. I'll tell you why. I don't take them for granted. Not at all. Some of my gurus are lay gurus. They smoke cigarettes and blow it in my face. I still don't lose heart, and I'm very scared to talk to them. Some of my gurus blow cigarettes in my face. Some of them blow cigarettes onto the tankas and say they're offering incense to the Buddhas. And then I don't react. Why don't I react? They're seeing how I act. They're seeing how my mind is. They're seeing how my perception is. They're seeing if I judge. Doesn't bother me at all. Not one bit. Some of my gurus, the lay ones, used to drag me in robes in Hubli into pubs. Into Indian pubs with all the people walking back and forth, and they drink beer in front of me while they tell me to tell them stories for about 5-6 hours. Yeah. I had one guru drag me to a pub in Hubli. I was in robes. I said, no, please. They said, never mind. I said, I'm in robes, and I can't. I said, you're in lay clothes. I can't, please. They said, no. He said, you have so many hang-ups. I said, it's not my hang-up. It's their hang-up. What? I can't go into a pub. And you know, the funny thing is 1 hour away in Ganden, because we're in Hubli, 1 hour away in Ganden, the Dalai Lama has arrived to give teachings. We're supposed to attend in a few hours' time. I'm thinking, oh dear. The Dalai Lama's in Ganden giving teachings in a few hours. All the high lamas are there. I'm here with my guru in the pub. And I'm pouring him beer. And he's drunk as a skunk, telling me to tell him all kinds of stories. I ran out of stories because I was scared. And the monks are walking back. Some of the monks saw me like, I'm like, uh-oh. I was really scared. And then in the middle of the pub, I let go. I said, forget it. If I miss the teachings, I miss the teachings. If I get caught, I get caught. I just let go. When I let go, he said, okay, let's go back to Ganden. I was like, huh? And then I had this wonderful duty of making sure he doesn't get run over because he was tipsy. He was like, I'm with my guru on the street in Hubli. Yes. And you know how they drive there? There's no rules. Everybody just drive the way they want. You guys saw India, right? I love it. And so I'm like, and the car's like, where did you come here? And I'm like, oh. When I got him on the bus, he was talking to everybody. I was like, oh, please, Rinpoche. And he would say real loud, can you see that old little woman over there? And he would give me psychic messages. You know what she did yesterday? I'm like, shh. Yeah. In front of me, Drigurumji. Tashi's met him. Tashi knows. He totally divinely crazy. He's embarrassed me in situations so many times. And I was thinking to myself, how come I am embarrassed? Why? Why am I embarrassed? I was asking to myself. And realization came. It didn't come overnight. It took a few years. If I did that here, people would be gone. Why? You say now in class, oh, it's teachings, it's wonderful, it's funny. If I actually did it, you're not strong enough to take it. None of you is. None of you is strong enough to take it. You're not so advanced. In that way, I'm better than you. I have a natural guru devotion. Other things I don't have, patience and all that. Guru devotion, naturally I have. I don't know why. Here, if you slip, they get you on the forums. They get you behind your back. They talk about you. I'm not coming back. Oh, they get you real fast. Nasty SMSs, losing patronage and sponsorship. Oh, yeah. Then, when we went back to Ganden, he was drunk as a skunk, and I was holding him walking down the street, and he was falling here and falling there, and he was slurring. I had to wipe his mouth and all that stuff. And then he said, okay, we have to go to teachings now. I was thinking, this is going to be really interesting. I said, okay, Rinpoche, see you later in teachings. Because with no disrespect intended, we sit in different areas in the teaching. So I have my place, he has his. I was like, see you later. I was like, so I ran off, He said, no. I was like, uh-oh. He says, I'm going to go inside and do a wind meditation. I'll be out in a little while, and I'll be fine. I'm like, wind? Okay. He went inside. He went inside my house. He closed the door and locked it. I saw him do this twice. He did some wind meditation. We call it the 6 yogas of Naropa. He came out totally sober 15 minutes later. I saw him drink 14 bottles of beer. Not small ones, the big ones. 14 bottles, those big ones. I saw it with my own eyes because I poured it for him. I even paid for it. I said, can I please offer it to you? I was in the pub. He came out of my room after having doors locked, totally sober, walking straight. I never had a bad thought about him again. I saw with my own eyes. So I know the Tibetan wind meditation, Lungom, especially those associated with Vajrayogini, are very powerful. Why? You can control your channels, you can control your winds. You can control the liquids and the fluids in your body. And I saw my guru do it. Another time in a hotel, he showed me the exercises. They're quite secret. He showed me the exercise, how to do wind meditation according to Vajrayogini. 6 yogas of Naropa, it's called. Narochuchu. I saw. And then he closed the door, he did it. I saw. And we went to teachings. Totally sober. Totally straight. No tipsy, nothing. And his eyes is focused. Irene knows him. Irene's met His Eminence Drigun Gyamgun Rinpoche many times. Tashi has met. Tashi has received a great Nyingma, Hayagriva, and Garuda initiation, Vajrapani from Rinpoche. Tashi, if I say, used to see a female spirit disturb her for many years. So she went to my guru. He did divination. He gave divination, initiation. After that, her problems disappeared. That was 15 years ago. Tashi in Delhi. We were together. That's right. She was there. I saw. After that, when I saw my gurus drinking or doing this, it doesn't make a difference. So when I saw Songsa Khyentse Rinpoche's video, I was very moved. I thought how fortunate his students are to have such a master who will dare do everything out of context, be rude, make them angry, wear funny clothes, go to games, and totally blow their mind away to show them who they are. I was so moved. And I thought to myself, I prayed, may I be just like him. And may I have the effect of what he does to his students. You see, here, if we do that to students, they lose faith and they lose confidence. And they avoid you, they get angry at you, they abuse you, they say negative things about you. In the Western countries, it's a little easier. Because Western countries don't have a very strong concept of how Tibetan Buddhist monks are supposed to be or not be. Here, they have a very strong concept of how monks are supposed to be, because here they have a strong tradition of monks in the East. So it's harder to do things like that here. It's harder to do things like that here, so therefore the progress is slower. Hence, in the East, you don't see any great scholars of Tibetan Buddhism, great masters of Tibetan Buddhism in the East, but you see a lot of great masters of Tibetan Buddhism and scholars of the West, like Jeffrey Hopkins, etc. You don't see much here. Why? They're still stuck on what it should be. So the minute a master acts this way, they reject them, they throw them out. So in the West, in the East, you don't see that. You don't see any great translators. You don't see any great masters of the Tibetan tradition. You don't see any lineage holders. Even the master tells them, you're going to be a lineage holder. When they're in a good mood, they say, thank you. Yes, I want to be. When they're in a bad mood, they ignore the Lama. They avoid the Lama. Although the Lama can make them a lineage holder. Do you know what a lineage holder means? You become someone that brings Dharma to hundreds of people and change their lives. That's what a lineage holder is. No shame. So to be a lineage holder, if the Lama shouts at you, abuses you, you should say, no problem, no problem. Why? He's training you to be a lineage holder. How is a Lama training you to be a lineage holder? In the future, when the students say bad things to you, are you going to ignore them, show them a black face, or complain? No, you have to be very patient. If you're going to be a lineage holder, you have to be better than your students. How can you be better than your students? Your Lama will train you up. Your Lama will abuse you, hurt you, say things to you, push you, and be very bitchy with you. Why? To show you what level your mind is. So if you're mean to your Lama and you don't improve, you're far from being a lineage holder. Far. Why? If you can't take it from your Lama, you think you can take it from 100 students? Do you think you can take it from 100 students? Abuse, negative talk. Even a few friends, even a few Dharma friends say things to you, comment or say a few things to you, you get very sensitive, you get very angry. How are you going to be a lineage holder? A lineage holder means someone who's patient, doesn't give up on other people, shows love. When they harm you, you give them love back. That's what a lineage holder is. What lineage are you holding? Buddha's lineage of compassion and wisdom. I believe Malaysians can be lineage holders. I believe. I would like to make a few lineage holders. But you must go through training. Giving a Lama Tsongkhapa initiation, giving a Vajrayogini initiation is very easy. I can give it to you. You think I can't give a Vajrayogini initiation? Sure I can. You think I can't give a Lama Tsongkhapa? Sure I can. I just brush up on my notes, go back, ask a few of my gurus. Just brush up, it's not a problem. Once you know how to do one initiation, that's pretty much the same if you do the commitments and you do the retreat and you do the practice yourself. Sure. It's very easy. But before you get initiation of Lama Tsongkhapa, before you get initiation of Zambala, before you get initiation of Vajrayogini, do you have compassion? Do you give up easy? Do you show blackface and show anger to people who hurt you? Do you react back to people negatively? If you do, you're not ready for the initiation. Initiation's easy. But preparing for initiation is not easy. Some people even say, hey, Rinpoche, why do you keep talking about mind, compassion, mind, compassion? Can we get something higher? I tell them, look in the mirror. Take a good look in the mirror. I've heard people say that. Why do you talk about the same thing year after year after year? Don't you have anything else to talk about? Plenty to talk about. Plenty. You know me. I'm a conversationalist, born to talk. No problem. Are you ready for higher teachings? If you are, come up and tell me you're ready and let me test you. If you can't pass the test, next time you ask for higher teachings, I'm going to step on you. And I'll make jokes about you in teachings for the next 5 years. Oh, yes. So don't be saying, when do we get Yamataka, Rinpoche? That center giving Yamataka. Oh, dear. How can we, all we ever do is learn Dharma and about the mind? Why don't we get some secret tantra? Can we ring a bell? Dear. Even I've heard some people excited to go ring a bell. You mean we can ring a bell during Tara Puja? I want to go. I want to ring my bell. I want to ring my bell. Oh, dear. Do we want to hear your bell? Oh, yeah. Yeah, people like, do you think Tantra is about a bell? You think Tantra is about a secret initiation? You know what Tantra is about? Tantra is about right now, this moment. Do you give up when it gets tough? Do you give up? Do you give up when things get difficult? Do you run away? Are you still feeling sorry for yourself and telling the world, I'm depressed? If you're still depressed, you're not ready for Tantra. You're not ready. When someone says something to you, do you go, blah, 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 blah? Oh, I want to be a lineage holder. Oh, dear. And then when someone says something to you, maybe you don't talk to them. All right, in your psychology, in your mind, deep down, say, I will not talk to them for 3 months and let them feel how they've hurt me. I will not talk to them. When I see them, I say, hello, but I will be cold. I will teach them a lesson. How they hurt me. They hurt me. I want to be lineage holder. Oh, dear. And then when you ignore people, when you're mean to people, and then you sit in front of Buddha and pray, oh, may I help all sentient beings? I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Oh, bless me, bless me, bless me. It's like Buddha inviting them to go inside a toilet. Come inside the toilet and bless me. After our meditation, Lama Tsongkhapa Buddha Yoga, we dissolve Lama Tsongkhapa inside of us. If we have good motivation, it's very clean, it's nice, it's a nice apartment. Clean and wonderful, nice green forest, emerald forest. If we have bad motivation, we ignore people, we're Anderson, we're narrow, we don't want to help, we're lazy, we don't want to push ourselves, we're full of anger. Then it's like a toilet. So we say, come and bless me. Tsongkhapa's like, all right, I'll come in and bless you. Yeah, you're like a toilet. Why are you like a toilet? Being angry is smelly. Being narrow is smelly. Having no awareness is smelly. It's like a dirty toilet. I'd rather eat inside a dirty toilet than hang out with someone that difficult, right? Do you want to be around someone who's so difficult, full of anger, never change, never, always narrow, listen to the Dharma talk here, and it comes out here, right? Cannot come out here because what our mother tells us comes out here. Go here, come out here. So what your guru comes out here. Easier what? You got many holes, so we utilize all. Think about it. And then we say, oh, I want to pray. And then you do offerings in front of the Buddha. You do nice offerings. Isn't my offerings nice? Look, I got IKEA tea lights. Oh, mani padme hum. And the Buddha's sitting there going, oh, dear. Oops. What do you think an offering is? Offering some cheap water from your faucet in front of the Buddhas? You think the Buddhas are sitting there all day going, I'm thirsty. Water. And you think your Dharma protector is sitting there waiting for your black tea, cheapskate black tea, while you have latte at Coffee Bean? You're having latte, go, how are you, dear? I'm fine. Are you rich? I am. And then to the Buddhas, you offer them one black, ugly tea in a small little bowl. Drink, drink. Dharma protector's like, You think the Dharma protector waiting for your ugly black tea? You think Shakyamuni or Tara or Tsongkhapa sitting on your altar waiting for your cheapskate little water? Some of your water, you add flavor to it, some dead bugs floating on top. Flavor what? Think about it. You think that's what the Buddha is waiting for? No. The Buddha is waiting for this. I'm not making a joke. And I can prove it to you in the Dharma text. What I tell you, everything what I tell you, I can prove it to you. I can prove it. When someone tells you something and you don't like, push yourself to listen. Push yourself to open. Push yourself to change your habit of closing people out. When you come across a difficult situation, don't run. If you have run, go back to it, apologize, and make up for it. Don't run and keep quiet. That's an offering to the Buddha. When someone gets on your nerves, show patience. Don't shout and hurt them back, ever. Ever. That's what the Buddha wants. That's better than your cheap little black tea that you bought from some discount store at Giants. Yes, we offer very cheap things on the altar, and what do we drink? We want to go to the best restaurant, best food, best places. We offer ourselves. A lot of people here, they think they're so holy offering water up to the Buddhas. You're cheapskates. But it doesn't matter. Buddha Shakyamuni don't need your water. And the Dharma protectors don't need your rotten little black tea. Gross. Anyway, who drinks black tea here? No honey, no water, no lemon. Just an ugly black tea. Who drinks that anyways? What do you think? The Dharma protectors can be bribed? Brapa. Oh, I want 3 black teas. I'll do what you want. I don't think so. And then some of us, we call ourselves Dharma practitioners. I want to change my parents. I want to change my friends. I want to bring Dharma to others. And I want to do Dharma work. Dharma work? You know what Dharma work is? Dharma work is not sweeping the temple. It's not finishing your assignment. Dharma work is transforming your mind. If you have the luck to be sponsored by Ganden Monastery and KH to do Dharma work, you are very blessed. If you threaten or think or you don't want to do or you want to run away or you don't do it well, you offend 3,000 Sangha. Very simple. Very simple. You offend 3,000 Sangha. So next time you go to Ganden, don't be sitting there going, You just walk in front of the Sangha telling, fly a kite. Because while you're here, you tell the Sangha to fly a kite. What? Every time you say something negative about the organization, about the liaisons, about the workers, about people who do work, you're saying that to 3,000. Every time you run away, when you want to do work, you run away. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. It's difficult for me. I want to move to another department. It's like musical departments. Every week you're in a different department because that department had a monster there. What's the point? So when you go to Ganden, you go like this to the Sangha, to the monks, the abbot, fly a kite. Don't go there and go, nah. Yo, grotesque. Why? They know what you did. They know. The high lamas know. Then when you go to Setrap Chapel, you go there with your cheap pearls. Then here you're angry. You ignore people. You're bitchy. You run away from responsibilities. You're not nice to your Dharma brothers and sisters. You're closed up. And then you go to Gandhi. Why do you think Satrap is like, ah? Why do you think? Look at the way you look. You're such a liar. Why do you think they're so pissed off? Go in that room. He's always pissed off. Always pissed off. You think about it. It's to control your mind. It sounds funny, but you better think deeper. Time is short. Opportunities will be lost. And if you think you're young, you're going to live forever, the people around you ain't going to be young and living forever, the people you care about. So every time you pray, every time you do your sadhana, every time you do your offerings, every time you look at the Buddha, shame, shame. Why shame, shame? Because you treat them like statues, not like Buddhas. You treat them like statues, not Buddhas. So, when we ignore people, hold a grudge,
心中含有那个埋怨，
hold a grudge against our friends, our relatives, our parents, our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our aunties. If we hold a grudge, we are not a Buddhist. You are not practicing Buddhism. You will gain 0 attainments no matter how many retreats you do. And in fact, you become a Dharma assassin, one who kills the Dharma, because people look at you, you're angersome, you hold on grudges, you don't transform. After so many years, you still hold on. You're a Dharma assassin. One who kills the Dharma, because when people look at you, they say, why like that? Some more you do retreat on. Some more you got Yidama. Some more you have Guru on. Some more you pray on. Shame, shame. If you want to get serious with your Dharma practice, you want to seriously get results and experience a higher level of consciousness, and I mean it. If you want to experience a higher level of consciousness beyond what you're used to, let go. Let go. Let go. Let go of what? Let go of people you're angry with. If you've been holding it for 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, 10 months, 10 days, 10 hours, 10 minutes, let go. Never show these people anger again. Let go. If you don't let go, your Dharma practice is wasted. Your retreat, your prayers, your Dharma work is not going to gain results. I promise you, you are not a Buddhist. I have proof. Let go. After today, go and make friends. After today, make friends and keep them friends. After today, anybody else that disturb your mind, change your mind and transform. Transform. If you want to be a Dharma practitioner, if you want to receive the higher teachings, if you wish to receive initiation, hold the higher vows, if you wish to have Guru devotion, if you wish the Dalai Lama to live long, let go. Let go. How do you let go? You created the karma for this. And you have experienced the karma. Watch it and let go. And the next time someone disappoints you and hurts you, the next one comes along, the next one comes along, next one comes along. Let go, let go, let go, let go. Then you think, but they're going to hurt me more. No, you hurt yourself more. Why do you hurt yourself more? Because you hold on. Let go. If you are my student, let go. Don't embarrass me anymore in public. If you are a Buddhist, let go. If you're 120 years old and any day now, let go. If you're 20 years old and the people around you is 120 years old, you better let go. Anytime they will be, let go. Let go of what? Your anger, ignoring, expectation, projection, and how you feel they should be. Let go. If you believe in Lama Tsongkhapa, let go. If you like make offerings on the altar, let go. If you love your Dharma protector because he's helped you, let go. If when you teach Dharma to others, to your family and to friends, and you want it to have power, let go. Let go. Because if you don't, the way you teach now, the way you explain, no one listens to you. Your relatives, your mother, your father, your friends, you can bring no one to the Dharma. Why? You know the Dharma. You had no power because you don't practice. So let go. If you love your mother, and you should, let go. And if you're a real Buddhist, let go. Last but not least, if you are a human being, then let go. Because we have to live together. We have to work together. And we have to have harmony. Let go. Well, why don't they let go? Because they didn't have anyone to tell them what's wrong with not letting go. No one gave them the Dharma. No one gave them knowledge. They don't have a guru. They don't have a teacher. They don't have the merits to hear the Dharma. So you should let go, not them, because they don't have the merits and the karma to let go. So you should let go. If the child jumps up and down and the mother jumps up and down too, doesn't that look stupid? If the child jumps up and down, the mother says, don't jump up and down. Don't do like that. Better, right? If the mother jumps up and down, the child tells the mother, don't jump up and down. How? Think about it. So why should you let go? Because you have a guru. Because you have the Dharma. Because you listen to the Dharma. Because you visited Ganden. Because you met High Lamas. Because you read stories of High Lamas. Because you have seen the Buddha. That's why you should let go. And if you don't let go, for a few years, you can tap dance. Da-da-da-da-da-da, I hate you. Da-da-da-da-da, I hate you. Da-da-da-da, I ignore you. Da-da-da-da-da-da. One day you can't tap dance and they're going to tap dance on you. Da-da-da-da. And you'll be like, uh-oh. Oh, yeah. Let go. If you don't let go, you get depressed. Boo-hoo. Everybody hates me. If you don't let go, you become more angry. If you don't let go, more people come to you and more you will hate them. If you don't let go, you send your mother and your father to hell. They produce the monster creating negative karma. If a son and daughter does like that, some Chinese believe is bad feng shui, bad luck for the parents, what? So if you keep having anger, you send your mother and father to hell. On earth and after. On earth, why? They look at their son, they look at their daughter, still like that. Then every time you look at the Buddha on your altar, every time you look at a Buddha picture, you have to be a new Chinese bride with a red veil because you're shameful. So you say, hi, Buddha Tsongkhapa, how are you? Why? Tsongkhapa comes to your room, go like that. Ah! Very scary. Ugly bride time. Could you see Justin here as a bride with a thing? And then Andy comes in, marital bliss night with a white sheet. He lifts up. Okay, no white sheet. Thank you. Bye-bye. Look. You think about that. You want to practice Dharma or you want to practice samsara? How long you want to have anger? How long you want to hold on to your concepts? How long you want to hold on to the way you think things should be? Should be this way, this way. They're like that, they're like this. That's why I'm like that. Stupid. Stupid. So when they drop dead and they take rebirth as a cow, you join them? They're the cow now, I join them. No.